Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our second virtual Pasco lecture. I am pleased and honored to have Susan Conley come and speak with us today to discuss her book, Landslide. And I should also mention, one of the reasons we can do this is I'm fully vaccinated, safely vaccinated, and Susan has had her first shot. So we're feeling a lot better, and it's nice to be able to spend time together. Thank you, Susan. And once again, the name of the book is Landslide. Now, before we discuss Landslide, because I love the book, by the way, I'm biased. I have to say I'm biased. But before we start, I'm really curious. I've interviewed you before for Elsie Come Home, and I've followed a lot of your writing before. When did you know that you could write or you would like to write?
Okay. Well, I'm a fourth-generation Mainer, and when I was growing up in mid-coast Maine, I have told this story before. It's one of my fondest stories about why I'm a writer. I had an English teacher in 6th grade, and he said several times a week that we would have free writing hour, and you could write anything you wanted, and that was just like candy to me. And I started writing these stories and poems, and there were no rules. And I think I've carried that idea with me, that story was a place to experiment in and let your imagination go. And I really believed in the idea of writing early.
And you were encouraged to write then?
I was encouraged. I was.
So how old were you when you had your first publication?
Oh, gosh, that's an interesting question. What would that constitute? Let's say...
Could be the school newspaper.
Right. No, you're right. I think I edited our school newspaper in 8th grade. But I remember in high school, the literary magazine, poems in the literary magazine. I was very, very devoted to poetry at the time.
Interesting. And now you write novels. Do you still write poetry?
You know, I don't write it, but I love it. I love it for its distillation and its emotion. I read it. Yeah, and it informs a lot of my work, my love of language.
That comes clearly through in your writing. I really enjoy your writing style.
Thank you so much.
As living in Maine, you mentioned your fourth generation. That's a hard act to follow. You really are a Mainer. How has living in Maine, do you think, inspired your work? Because you also went to China and you came back from China. So I'm wondering, is there something particular about Maine?
Well, for Landslide, yes. Enormously so. I've been saying that Landslide feels like the book I was waiting to write that was about the place I love the most, which is Maine. And I'm 53 now, feeling rather ancient. And I felt like, okay, now's the time to write this book that celebrates Maine, puts a light on Maine. I had things to say about Maine finally that were kind of inchoate before, right? They were growing. And then suddenly my kids, who were 4 and 6 in my very first book, which was a memoir, are 18 and 20. So suddenly I felt like I have a vantage to say some things about how Maine has changed and how I see Maine in this moment of decision around, what it'll be in some ways. So I had a lot of things to explore, and it was fun. It was fun to write about a place I actually knew really well.
You give that, but you also knew really well what newcomers were thinking. How did you get that? Because I'm new to Maine.
Oh, you're new.
I'm
That's right. I forget. And
you captured it, wanting to change things. I'll come in and it's a little noisy down the street. What can we do? Live with it.
I love that vantage point you have. When you write a novel, you're doing drama, right? Mm-hmm. So what I call it, because I'm a writing teacher as well, you turn up the heat a little. So where an outsider, someone from away, might not always not love the noise. In the novel, I say things like, there are people that wish that the lobster boats would quiet down at 4 a.m. Now, having come from a coastal town in Maine, I grew up on the sound of lobster boats, right? Like that's music to me, really. Like I enjoy it. People going to work on a boat, right? I know a lot of people that have moved to Maine. You know, I live in Portland.
Yes.
I'm involved in the nonprofit that I co-founded up there, the Telling Room. You feel the new and the old in Portland a lot.
Interesting. Portland has really changed over the years. I mean, it's a thriving place to be, and I'm surprised at how much younger it is than when I first moved here.
Yeah.
And it's very active. You mentioned that you started this book how long ago? Before because when I interviewed you before, you had submitted it, I thought, to Knopf.
You're right. I sold it and submitted it and sold it right before my previous novel, Elsie Come Home, came out. So I already had it in the queue. I wrote it quickly. I call it sort of like in a fever dream.
Okay.
You know, it came quickly because I had been chewing on these ideas for a while.
Interesting.
Yeah, it came quickly. And I don't say that, I say that with great humility. I mean, quickly in a writer's life is like a year. So that might sound like a long time.
That's quick, actually. No, that's...
It's pretty quick. Yeah.
Interesting. Did you have an agent that you worked with?
I've had the same agent for my whole writer's life. Yeah.
Well, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
I want to go back to Landslide.
Okay.
I want you to tell me how you came up with the cover.
The cover. Well.
I love it. It's just...
Thank you.
It looks like he's going the opposite of what he should be going.
Yeah, teenage boy.
Yeah.
That's a great way of saying it. It's a metaphor in a way for the whole book is, wait, you're not going the way you should be going. And the idea of... First, it's an homage to Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, which that sort of song opens the book, Landslide, for those of us in the 70s who grew up on Stevie Nicks like me. And I love that Maine is a place where you hear a lot of Fleetwood Mac and Stevie Nicks, and it's kind of an anthem, that song. And then the idea, once I get a metaphor going, I can really pull it through the whole novel. So then we have the landslide of change for the fishing industry, for these boys who are facing these different sort of crux moments, right? When you're 16, when you're 17. So what happens at Knopf is they have a great art department, and I have never not loved their cover. I mean, a lot of writer friends I have, like, they agonize over their covers and they really go back and forth. And, you know, the only thing we did, they sent, what they do is they send me a mock-up on a real book. I loved it. But then we tinkered with the water, like the texture and the quality of the water. And that was all we did. And, you know, it has gotten some really nice praise, that cover.
It's an incredible cover.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, too, about the image of wolves. I have two sons.
Oh.
So, and, you know, it was a wonderful imagery when you talk about raising sons as raising wolves. So was there a book or books that kind of influenced you with the wolves, with raising sons? Where did you come up with that idea?
You know, that's just the way that, thank God, the imagination works. So that came early, really early. In fact, I was driving up the coast. I was listening to the radio. I was going to Wiscasset, actually, and Fleetwood Mac came on. And I started singing, and then I thought, oh, my boys would hate that I'm singing so loudly.
And they were not in the car.
They were not in the car, but I imagined them in the car. I pulled over in Wiscasset, and I do this thing where I have a little notebook always, and I scribbled some of the very dialogue that's in that first page. And the boys were wolves. They were wolves. It was the older wolf and the younger wolf. And once I landed on that they were wolves, it gave me a real sense of who they were, you know, and that metaphor is rich, right?
And other authors have used it. That's, as it was mentioned, Landslide was reviewed in the New York Book Review on Sunday, March 7th, and it's an excellent review that everybody should take some time to read. Because they brought up the whole issue
They
to
did.
the wolves. Yes,
You're
yes.
right. There was a lot of time on the wolves. I did not have that lineage of literary wolves in my head, but I read voraciously, and I love when writers do use animals as stand-ins for particularly kids. I've seen crows used well. Wolves to me are loyal, devoted, really smart, pack-like. They can be feral, but they're also just really incredibly loyal and to each other
As a group.
And so that's really what I was going for. Less the menace and more the sort of the smarts and the wiliness of a wolf, I think.
Now, have your sons read your book?
They have not read it. They have not. They certainly could. Landslide, in a way, shines a light on, I think, all the wonderfulness of boys, but also the myopia, right? Mm-hmm. So why would they read my book? They don't have time.
But I'm sure they've heard.
Oh, yeah. They've heard. I think my older son, well, I need to say that these boys are so different than my two, very intentionally. So in this novel, we have a mad scientist boy, and then we have a boy that is getting into some trouble. Like, I'd say lowercase t trouble, but he's heading towards bigger trouble.
Getting drunk.
Yeah. I mean, it's not earth-shattering trouble, but the problem with him, and this is what I was really trying to do in this book, is he's got trauma. He's got trauma, and we don't have to say exactly what, but he's suffered a loss. And so when you have a boy who's already suffered loss and starts tracking in the wrong direction, the mother, Jill, she's paying close attention. But that said, my boys will read the book. It's just not on the top of their list right now.
I just wondered what they thought of the imagery, so I don't think they'd want to read the book. Oh, my mom wrote it.
Yeah. Maybe when they're 30. My hope is that when they're in their 30s or something, they'll settle in and read all my work.
That would be interesting.
Wouldn't
Yes,
it?
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they will.
And that would be fine too.
So how long did it take you to finish Landslide then? You said a full year?
I call that the really important, messy first draft.
And how many drafts were there?
It's hard to say. There's these, I would call them iterations, sort of.
The iterative process.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I sure can. Maybe it's not a full new draft. It's burrowing in and working on this section and then feeling good about the middle and then going to the end and really examining the end and then sending it off to my editor, my same editor for the last 4 books at Knopf. So we speak a shorthand. That's why I mentioned that. We really speak a shorthand. And then she gives it back and says, okay, great, but you just did that cool thing near the end with the therapist, for example. Let's have more. Oh, I say, more? You like it? Okay, cool. I'll do more. And it goes like that. Sort of, I hand it to you, you hand it back. So it's not as clean exactly as drafting. And the other thing I'll say about Landslide is it did come out, that first messy draft really was my vision for it. So it wasn't like it was ever major surgery after that. Yeah.
Did you leave the state to go to school?
Oh, I've left the state, I've left the country. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do know about leaving Maine.
So a part of you really understood what she felt like, the wife.
I did.
In coming back and seeing how different it was for those who didn't leave, who chose not to leave.
I absolutely understand that. And that is still a really big thing here for people that have grown up here, whether they'll leave or not.
It is. And her husband really was afraid he lost her.
Yeah. And he almost did. Yeah.
And, well, I was going to say, and drugs was the reason that she left it didn't work out. And I wondered, do you think she was overreacting to smoking marijuana?
Great question. Yeah, that's such a great question. And I had woven that into the narrative, but very few people have picked up on that.
I just, because I kept on saying to myself, they were doing marijuana. I don't understand why she's so afraid of it until I saw the connection later.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah. And also her son, Sam, he's idiotic because he posts the photo on Instagram.
Yes.
And that's where she crosses the line for her, you know. She says, what idiot would do that? Well, he did. But yeah, she was having a relationship with someone who was very drug addicted, and it definitely informed her. And, you know, I see this, I think we all see this. If someone has something in their past that is bringing something up, it'll look like an outsized reaction. Mm-hmm. And we won't know why. I see this all the time. Oh, and then you learn, oh, well, this happened to you or it happened to someone you know, and then it makes more sense.
But why couldn't she be more forgiving of her husband?
In what way?
The other woman who befriended him.
Oh, interesting. So it's so interesting. We can't give that all away, but I will say...
This is a great read. I mean, and these are things to think about when you're going along reading the book. It's like, now why is this and why did she do that? And I'm like, well, give him a break.
Now, in contrast, I have readers who are like, nope, never letting him back in the house. So there we go.
But she left the state.
Well, see? That's a great retort.
This is a wonderful book for discussion groups. Yeah. It really is, because you could go on and on about this whole thing.
Yeah.
So I was seeing it differently, and just probably growing up in Cambridge, and life was a lot different back then, and pot smoking was more the norm, and in Maine it wasn't. When I first moved up to Maine, I was like, oh my God, this is like the Twilight Zone. I'm going back in time. And this is so innocent. There's a swimming hole and all this stuff. And yeah, there are a lot of other things too.
Yeah.
The fish that fishermen lobstermen no longer can have as much catch as they used to, and everything's cut back, and the big fishing. Yeah, you really brought in all the issues that the family was faced with.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried. I really tried to be in the life of a coastal fishing family, and I knew a number of those families.
Could there be a sequel?
There could be. It's very funny how many people ask me that.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. It's not where my energy is.
But it's a book that could have a sequel.
Yeah. You know, I also want to say, I think it's because you're older and I'm getting there that I have forgiveness for Kit, the father. I do. I have hope for that family. I have a lot of hope for that family. I have found it's the younger generation that they aren't married yet.
And they may not have left, and they
don't understand maybe what long marriage means. So,
but they did, in their own way, come to some kind of an agreement, and that's why it really was a perfect setting for a sequel.
I love that.
And other people are telling you that too.
Yeah.
What are you working on now then? Because I know you're working on something.
I am.
There's no way.
I'm noodling on something. I mean, and the book only came out 2 months ago. So I've been tap dancing on Zoom, you know, for a month, I think, or close to a month. I think I almost had an event every night. And I mean, I'm not complaining at all. It was just surreal the way Zoom allowed me to go all around the country in my office, really. So my brain wasn't thinking in language or in news story. I just finished an essay today for a magazine out of Portland, Decor, Maine. I don't know if you know that one. It's a great magazine that it always publishes nonfiction. And so they had asked me to do an essay, and I was able to articulate some more thoughts about the wolves in Landslide and about being what we call a boy mom, and being a mom who's trying to raise feminist evolved boys. So that essay just got finished. And I have a lot of notes for a new novel. I do. That will be very much about women now. Go back to women. This is more boys, family, and the next one will be young women, sort of in their late teens, early 20s, circling a question that I always try to put a question on my novels. And right now, in this very early moment, all I can say is that they're going to have some contention in their tight friend group around how much sort of so-called power they have. So it sounds very vague, but it's actually very specific where they'll be.
It's interesting. I was listening to something else at NPR today, and there's a talk about a woman author. She, when she had her son, her major primary concern was that he would be a feminist boy. And you used a similar expression.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, feminism is just men and women are equal. Simple as that. So because we have this really masculinized sort of way of thinking about boys, you know, I try to always remind my boys about this idea of equality. It's part of the air they breathe in my house. Yes. So it's easy, and I tell them sometimes, whoever you marry, if you marry, will thank me. I said that even last week. They will thank me. I don't think my son was thanking me at the time. I think he was maybe rolling his eyes because he'd heard it before.
No, it's important. They'll be good husbands or good partners.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned you had the same agent.
Yes.
How did you find your agent? Because this is something for budding writers. It's like,
yes.
Am I going to self-publish? Do I need to find an agent?
Right.
How did you find your agent?
So there are a lot of agents out there, and you find them the way you would solicit a job. I mean, you go out and you look, and then you query them, you write them. So, I mean, there really are a lot of them, and you find the ones that are your niche. So, contemporary literary fiction. Stories about women, stories about families, stories about travel. There I am. And then you write and you say, here's 30 pages of my project. What do you think? When I think back on when I found my agent, I had a very, very specific story that I had told in that first memoir, The Foremost Good Fortune. So I think an agent was either going to like it or not. It was my story of coming into cancer and coming into understanding China as a woman, right, with these two boys. And
who were very young.
And it was so specific. It was very easy for me to have what I would call like a purchase, if you will, like a place to stand and say, here, agents, are you interested? And that was right when China was on everyone's minds, because we were going to have the big Olympics, if you recall.
Oh, yeah.
It was like coming out of China. And so there was a fair bit of interest in the book. So I had some great agents to choose from. And I think I only mentioned that story of mine as a cautionary sort of tale of individuate yourself when you're looking for an agent. Write the most unique cover letter you can. Nothing generic, nothing generalized about you. You have to really carve out your position.
Did you have any rejections?
From agents? Oh, I had agents pass on it, for sure. But I think this querying is maybe in groups of 6 or 8. So, it's like blind dating. Mm-hmm. And then you find a fit, and I found a fit, and I have had that agent ever since, which is not unusual,
when you find one that you can work with well. I just heard an interview with Jennifer Weiner, and she was talking about she contacted 25 agents and only one responded. Everybody else rejected. And she actually parted ways with this one because after she read the book, the woman wanted her to change the end and have her character lose weight, and she thought that wasn't really fair. So it seems like you really had a good relationship. I don't know what the magic was. In between sixth grade writing stories and finding a good agent, you really have a good working relationship that helps with your writing.
Yeah. Well, I always had writing as my, God, I think I'll say beacon. I'm going to use that word. I went to college to write.
Where'd you go?
I went to Middlebury, where if you were in literature and you were in this particular program that I was in, you could write a book for your senior thesis, a whole book, working one-on-one with a writer. And that was very interesting to me. That was...
Did you write a book?
I did. I wrote a book of poems. And then I went to graduate school, and I wrote all genres, and that is why I write memoir, poetry, fiction. I credit my graduate program in San Diego because you had to write across genre. And I always want my students to do that. In the grad program, I teach it, and at Stone Coast here in Maine. They can get so scared about, nonfiction if they're fiction. And I always try to explode that and call it, I like to call it story. You're writing story, not, it's got to be, the story can only be told as memoir, Sometimes we have more access to things when we let go of the truth, actually. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, I found a good match with my agent. But
you also, even with the cover design, and I like the cover for Elsie Come Home.
Yeah. The cover is all purview of the editor. Mm-hmm. The agent does get involved if she doesn't like it or if she has a feeling about it. Everyone's in concert. It really is a team. But when we get into this stuff, it's more editor driven. And then, it might be fun for people to hear, like, Landslide was probably going to be the title, but we threw around a number of titles. So this can happen right near the, right as we were thinking about.
It wouldn't have been Fleetwood.
I know. Well, we would have had Fleetwood Mac, but we wouldn't have had the title, and then we wouldn't have had the metaphor.
And then the title with the book cover would have been different.
Totally different. Yeah. So it just was a lot of good dialogue. And that's the process, I would say, of book writing, book building. When you get into the production part of it, there's so much dialogue. What do you like? Do you like the water darker or lighter? What do you think of the font? It's kind of fun. People think that's one of my sons.
Interesting.
But, it's a French photographer, and he, Knopf bought the photo from him, and it turns out he's had a number of photos on covers of wonderful books. And he wrote me, and he said, I love this cover so much. Will you sign a book and send it to me in France? I want to buy one for my nephew, because that was his nephew. It's kind of fun.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
Now, as all books have, you've chosen 2 different quotes. So I'm wondering why. Did you choose this before, afterwards?
I love these quotes.
Yes.
Yeah. So this little quote from the Rick Moody short story is one of my favorite things. Should I read it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's a part of a longer story, but I think the whole story is 1 page tops. And it's called Boys. And as a mother of boys, and you're a mother of boys, to me it encapsulated the entire experience of having boys. It's deadpan. So it's deadpan humor. Boys enter the house. Boys enter the house. Boys, and with them, the idea of boys. Ideas leaden, reductive, inflexible, enter the house. Boys enter the house speaking nonsense. Boys enter the house calling for mother.
That's incredible.
Isn't it? And it goes on, but all of us, parents of boys or girls, you name it, Mom, called out throughout the house.
So is this a part of the iterative process that you had this quote in your mind when you're writing the book?
Such a good question. Here's what this does. So when I find a piece like that, a little nugget, I keep it in my imagination, and I also might keep it actually near me, out. And what it does is it does a couple of things. It inspires me, literally. It excites me about the possibility of language, and it gives me permission to try it also.
Interesting.
Because I wanted to write a slightly deadpan, funny-ish look at boys and their mom, and I found some way in. This helped me. Like, writers help other writers. Rick Moody helped me get in. And then May Sarton, I love May Sarton, and I had read a lot of her work, and I just think she's pretty terrific. This solitary figure, right? Often in these houses. And the line I used of hers is, "Yes, I am home again, but home has changed." And it's from her collection Letters from Maine, which I thought was really appropriate. And she has that iconic book called, I believe it's called The House by the Sea.
Yes.
So that book, it was iconic for me. I remember reading that book in college and thinking, oh my God, writers live alone in houses by the sea and they write. And I thought, well, that's so romantic. I want to do that.
It's interesting because that when I read Yes, I Am Home Again, but Home Has Changed, it made me think of Jill, but it also made me think of her husband, because Jill coming back from leaving Maine, and then her husband with his injury coming back.
I love that.
It was very, in
That's
fact,
it.
I kept on going back and reading these two quotes at the
Oh,
beginning.
I love that. Yeah, that's it. By the time Kit, our fisherman, comes home, his home has changed.
Definitely.
Oof.
And so has his wife.
Yeah.
Now tell me about, what is the telling room? You mentioned something earlier.
It is a really great writing loft, writing space in downtown Portland, but we have now fanned out, we've done programs all over the state. Basically, our idea is children are natural storytellers, and we bring writers to children in classrooms, and we bring the kids to our big, huge writing loft. And we work with like 4,000 kids a year.
And how old are the kids?
8 to 18. So we meet kids wherever they're at, and we have turned on many, many lights in young writers' minds. So we're all over the place in terms of, we have kids writing memoirs and poems and doing live readings, and the website is fantastic. So if any of your listeners are thinking about any kind of volunteer work involving story, we love our volunteers, and they become part of our community.
And it's based in Portland?
It's right in Portland.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's www.tellingroom.org.
Okay, tellingroom.org.
Yeah.
Excellent,
Yeah.
thank you. Now, I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you think you'd like to answer?
Do I like my characters?
Yes.
Yes. I like all my
Good.
characters. Yeah. I don't judge them, and I want them to have weaknesses and strengths. And
Have you ever had a character you didn't like?
oh, remember that woman in Elsie Come Home, that British woman that was really bossy on the mountain?
Yeah.
She drove me crazy. But I wanted her to. And then I remember now, in the end, she softens. She cracks. I think her husband's having an affair or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you could understand where she's coming
Yeah.
from. Sounds like a lot of affairs have been going on.
Well, novels run on tension. They run on conflict. That's what I always have to remind my students,
Interesting. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are very good at description, and they think that they have a story to tell. You know, they want to write a story about even a car crash. I'll have people come to me and say, I've got this great story. This car crashed. And I always have to say gently, so that's not really your story. Your story is if there was conflict going on in that car before it crashed. You know, if you see.
So leading up to it, okay.
Yeah. And I think we forget, a lot of writers forget that, you know, without tension, we don't really have story. Story, to me, in its most elemental form, is this idea of moving forward, right? And change, synonymous with change. And so if there's change, then there will be tension before there's change. Okay. Something will be shifting.
That's good for writers to think about.
Yeah. I think it's very helpful. And thus affairs, thus trouble, you know, in my books.
I just had one question that I thought of. You were late. What happened?
Oh, today.
Yes. Did one of the wolves do something?
Yeah, one of the wolves took the car. We're all like, who? So now he has his license, so there's that. And then no one drives anywhere because of COVID, and suddenly the car was gone. Because high school has allowed for training for this in spring sports. So,
and what sport is he playing?
He's captaining the tennis team this spring, which is very fun. You know, you get to be outside and you're not close together, and it's good. He's loving it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good story. Is there anything else we should have mentioned?
No, I think this has been wonderfully comprehensive and fun and insightful of you.
Well, it's been a delight, and please, we have copies of Landslide that will be autographed by the author, Susan Conley, so definitely get your copy and have your book group read it. It's well worth it, especially for people who live in Maine now, who came to Maine, and who've always been here in Maine. There's something for everybody.
Thank
you
so
Susan.
much. Yeah, my great pleasure.